Good Sunday morning. I'm Jaden Jefferson, and welcome to this week's Community Focus. This morning, I'm joined by Nina Greenberg of Students Demand Action. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.
So let's first talk about what was the headline-making event of this week, which was that mass shooting in Nashville. Your group has been very active in terms of gun violence here in our area. Multiple different events you guys have held and had multiple different pleas for our lawmakers. So in this moment, what is your initial reaction?
Well, with every mass shooting that happens across the country, we're deeply saddened, but this is nothing new. America has a history and continues to make the status quo that we accept that there will be school shootings within this country. We try to do our best to call on lawmakers to pass legislation that would diminish the presence of mass shootings in our country. We've asked for lawmakers to deny a bill in our state called House Bill 51. We've asked lawmakers to pass red flag laws. We've asked for increased background checks. But beyond that, we try to engage our community and we try to advocate for our own safety. That only gets us so far. So although we've seen that this happens over and over again, we call for change and we hope that in some way our pleas will be heard.
And this continues to happen. And it seems like after every single event, we have this same conversation. And I'm willing to bet this is not going to be the last time we have this conversation this year, unfortunately. So what's going to give? It seems like we're just we're going to be here for a while because lawmakers aren't taking action.
Right. That's what we've seen for decades. When Congress failed to reinstate that assault weapons ban, we saw an increase in mass shootings across the country. And since then, we've kind of been at a stalemate. We haven't really seen action, although President Biden passed some form of legislation which would increase background checks and funding for different community safety measures. We haven't seen significant action and significant results because of that legislation. So it's going to take a lot of work on our lawmakers' part. They're just not willing to do it. Even after this Nashville shooting, we've seen calls for an assault weapons ban and increased action in general on gun violence prevention. But certain lawmakers are not willing to budge, and it's going to take a widespread movement to get to this place of safety for our communities. And a lot of lawmakers are just not willing to go there.
And what are your group's next steps? Because obviously you guys continue to advocate throughout the year, but what's going to be changing as a result of this most recent incident?
Unfortunately, this is just like every shooting that's happened so far in this country. And it's terrible that it's happening to kids at such a young age, but it's going to continue to happen for these same age kids. Although our specific group is planning action, we plan to conduct protests and reach out to lawmakers. We just had an advocacy day last week in which we spoke with lawmakers about different pieces of legislation we hope to see passed in the Ohio legislature. We're going to do our part locally and engage our community, but on a national level, it's going to be up to the lawmakers.
And this obviously is an issue that really does continue to plague our communities. But in talking about Ohio in particular, what are some challenges that come with trying to address an issue like gun violence?
Ohio specifically is an interesting situation. We are a historically red state, and that kind of comes with a given that most Republicans won't be in favor of gun sense legislation. Not to say all won't be, but that's kind of the trend that we've seen, being that Ohio is a red state. When we sat down with lawmakers last week, most of them weren't willing to budge on their specific viewpoints. Some were able to endorse and see our point of view on our community violence-based interrupters, in which we asked for additional funding on community interrupters. But the further legislation, the more, I guess you could say, it's a little bit more focused on controlling the different types of weapons or the amount of weapons that go out into the community. They weren't willing to budge there.
If you had a demand or specific request for lawmakers, whether that be here in the State House in Ohio or in Washington, D.C., what would be your biggest request for them right now?
I would have to request that they do something. As of right now, we've seen this over and over and over again. You'd think that there would be a catalyst event, maybe Uvalde, where 20 children were murdered, or just this week when 3 kids were murdered and 3 more teachers. You'd think it would be enough to ask these lawmakers to do something, yet it isn't. I ask that they pass legislation that would protect their students, protect the teachers, protect their communities, their own children from being gunned down at school. Maybe it is an assault weapons ban. Maybe it's raising the minimum age that people in this country are able to own guns. Maybe it's enacting red flag laws. As we've seen in Nashville, the shooter actually had a history of emotional distress, and the family didn't want that person to have a weapon or a gun for that matter. So if we pass legislation like the red flag laws and other similar legislation, we could see an increased level of safety from our communities and not have 100+ people killed per day by guns.
It's really, really a pervasive issue, and it's only going to stop or at least be reduced when we take action. And I want people to know that we're tired of covering them. You know, it's always something new, and it does get old. So for those of you out there that have maybe at this point felt like, I just can't continue to take it in, I get that. We are definitely in a place where it seems like it's the type of thing where you want to tune out. But in order for change to happen, you have to continue to tune in, unfortunately, for the reality that we have here. Nina Greenberg of Students Demand Action, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. And that's this week's Community Focus. Have a great week.